Hello, everybody. Ben Gothard here with another Project Egg interview, and today we're talking to CJ Ripka from South Dakota. How you doing, CJ?
Doing well, man. How you doing?
Awesome, doing great, and it's so nice to have somebody with a very professional setup on the other end. The sound quality is awesome, so that's cool. But let's get started, man. Let's jump right in. My first question for you is, what is your story?
Well, my story is pretty simple, really. I started off in the military I served in the military for 17 years, and while I was in the military, I got this opportunity to become the state public affairs representative for South Dakota. Now, with that, I also became the state video producer for the state of South Dakota, and I had no idea what I was doing. I really thought it was just going to be, putting stuff up on social media, kind of establishing a web presence. And then all of a sudden, this whole video and audio thing got dropped in my lap. So I started diving in and learning everything I could possibly learn about that. Well, when I got out of the military, I was diagnosed with PTSD and along with some of the other issues that I had from serving overseas. And I found podcasting as a way for me to kind of uh, create my own therapy, if you will. So by me being able to put my message out, it kind of connected with me with other people who kind of felt the same way and who supported what I was doing. So my story really has become uh, kind of a success story, if you will, about how to kind of work through your problems by talking about your problems.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. So, I kind of want to dig a little bit into your past. So you said you went to the military for 17 years. Um, when did you first go in there? At what age? And maybe you could talk a little bit about your experiences, if you feel comfortable speaking about
Sure,
those.
absolutely. No, yeah, I started at 17. I was that typical kid. I came from a really small town of only 300 people. So there wasn't a whole lot of opportunity to kind of get out and create a career. I didn't have the ability to go to college right away because, well, face it, I was not the great student. School was extremely boring to me, so I really didn't have a plan for college after school. So the military was something that was there for me. So at 17 years old, I signed up with my parents' permission, went to basic training the first year out of school. And then the second year after my senior year, I went back to my advanced individual training. And from that, it became kind of just an ongoing thing. The military kind of creates your life for you, if you will. So I didn't have to do a whole lot of thinking. I just had to, you know, point my nose in the direction they told me to point it, and that was about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, having spent so much time there, um, and doing the things you did and learning the things that you did, um, what would you say you took away from that experience? What would you say has benefited you today? Like what principles or concepts or ideas did you get from that experience that has now contributed to your success now?
Well, I would say the first thing that I learned was failure won't necessarily be the end of you. You can create all the plans for your lives, and things don't always seem to work out. So if you fail, all that's doing is it's presenting a problem and a solution that's not going to work. So all you got to do is go back to the original problem and rethink through the solution. It's the same, and it's the same thing for anything that we do in life. It's not just necessarily in the military, it's everything that we do. There's always problems. Each and every day we're faced with hundreds of problems. Some of them are so simple to solve that we don't even think about it. They just present themselves with the solution, and we've done it a million times. We go through the motions. Then there's those other problems that they come up, and we freak out a little bit. The voices in our head start telling us that, hey man, you're not good enough to do this, or you can't do this because of the X, Y, and Z. And that was the other thing that I learned in the military. You got to shut off that negative thing. You got to shut off those voices in your head telling you that this won't work. because every problem has a solution. Every problem will work eventually as long as you keep going after it, keep trying new things and not just by yourself. There's always people around you. And that was the other thing that the military really taught me. You don't have to rely on yourself to come up with the answers to everything. You got the guy to your left, the guy to your right, the guy to the back and to the front of you. All those people create that team to be able to create the solution that you're looking for. So those values are things that I really kind of took away with me that kind of helped me push forward in what I'm doing now.
Absolutely. And you talked about having the ability to rely on other people as kind of being very important. And I do think that entrepreneurship is a lot of teamwork. It's a lot of social skills. It's a lot of working with other people. Could you maybe talk about how developing those communication skills and those people skills has benefited you in your entrepreneurial career?
Well, if you look at what we are as a society, people in general are social creatures. So nothing moves forward without somebody else saying it's okay to move forward. In sales, for example, you could have the greatest product in the world, but if you don't try to sell it to the next person, or if they don't give you the okay to sell it to them, as in become a buyer, you don't have anything. All you have is a lump of rock that sits on your desk. So being social creatures, if you can't develop those skills to be able to go out and just talk to somebody, or maybe the communication is smiling at somebody, or maybe the communication is just saying, hello, my name is. If you can't develop those communication skills early on, you're really going to have a hard time in the entrepreneur world, because everything that we do as entrepreneurs is meeting that next person or learning from somebody to be able to go out and spread our message. So as entrepreneurs, our number one skill that we really need is that communication, being able to put ourselves out. And I'm not saying it's not okay to be an introvert versus an extrovert. I'm not saying that at all. But everybody can develop the skills to at least say, hi, my name is.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, as an entrepreneur, I definitely think that we always need to constantly be developing our skills and learning. But for those who maybe are just starting out and who might not have those skills as fully developed, what advice would you give to them to help them further along their own journey?
It's okay. So when I was younger, I went through an acting class, and in this acting class, the teacher always said, "Act as if." And I've heard this even in business where people say, act as if. And a lot of people say, well, you don't want to do that because you're not going to come off as authentic. You're not being real and blah, 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 blah. But that is BS, because what happens when you act as if, what happens when you build a persona in your head, you want to build that realistic persona of yourself, but you just flip it just a little bit. You only go 90 degrees with it, because what's going to happen is the more you become that person, the more real that person is. And the more real that person is, the better you're going to show up. So, for example, my name is Chris Ripka. Chris goes to work every day. He does his job. He provides for his family. He does the things that he needs to do. CJ, on the other hand, is that same guy with just a little bit different perspective. Now he's a little bit more open. He's a little bit more in your face. He's going to deliver his message in a way that is going to resonate with the people that he's talking to. So it's the same guy with just a little different perspective. I don't have self-esteem issues. I don't have confidence problems when CJ's playing the game. But when I'm Chris sometimes says, you know what, maybe I should listen to my wife a little bit more and maybe not jump into this thing, because things might not work out.
Right, right, absolutely. And I was listening to this one speech by this entrepreneur, Jason Nazar, who was the founder and CEO of DocStock, which was recently acquired by Intuit. And he was saying one of the things that he does in his organization was every day he gets all of his employees to pick a different superhero, and they during that day or that week or whatever it was were going to pretend to be that superhero. And so if they were Batman, then they would always strive to be, persistent and resilient and never give up. And it's kind of like what you're saying. You have this persona, and when you're a superhero, when you think you're a superhero, or when you are a superhero, you're not going to lose, right? You're always going to find a way to win. And it was really cool how he was explaining the difference that it made in his organization just from giving people a stronger persona to live up to. So
Yeah, it's that classic hero's journey. You got this thing you want to accomplish. Things don't always work out, but then you find this thing, and then at the end of the day, you've succeeded because you didn't give up on what your goal was. So yeah, that's awesome. I need to use that from now on.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I am a little biased. I do love Batman. That's why I had to toss him in there. But,
Yeah.
but anyways, man. So you got out of the military, and then you went to work for the state of South Dakota. Were you working for the state, or how exactly did that work?
No, when I left the military, actually what had happened was I wanted to distance myself from anything that I experienced with the military, because my time over in Afghanistan, things happen. My real job in the Army was infantryman, and things happen, and you don't always come back whole, if you will. And after an experience that I had when I first come home, that when the PTSD really spiked, I attempted to commit suicide. And when that happened, my wife said, enough's enough. We need to figure out what we need to do to fix you. So I tried everything. I distanced myself as far away from anything military as I possibly could. So I went into a career field of underwater photography and diving. So I really kind of did that for a while. And as I kept going, I started realizing that my symptoms of PTSD weren't going away. That stuff was still there. I was having bad days. I was losing jobs that I really enjoyed doing, but I was so self-destructive, and I just didn't care about what was going on. And then I had a chance encounter with a guy who said, I understand that you do video production and audio production and stuff like that. Why don't I have you come to work for me? And that's all you'll have to do. You just have to, make me look good on camera. Well, long story short there, it was almost impossible to make him look good. So he decided to put me in front of the camera instead. And then that started my broadcasting career, really. So without him, I wouldn't have found that little piece. And then I started doing just training videos for a company. Some people might know who they are. They're Northrop companies and stuff like that. Lockheed Martin, I did a couple training videos for them. And it really kind of opened up my eyes as to a direction that I should be going. I loved video. I loved audio. The stuff I was doing, I was just getting by with. And it wasn't until I found my passion and was able to really dive into that passion where it started to make sense to me on how to get over that PTSD hump. And that's when the podcast started.
Absolutely. And so, could you tell us a little bit about, and us, I mean, myself and the audience, a little bit about your podcast and what you talk about, and maybe talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Well, in the early days of the podcast, I kind of just talked. I didn't really have a show format. I didn't have an idea of what I wanted to even put out there, but I talked about whatever it was. It really was more of an audio journal, if you will. So if I had a bad day at work, I would rant about what happened at work. Which I found out later on that's not necessarily the right thing to do either, because you can get into all sorts of libel issues with just when you're talking bad about a place that you work. So that's if you're wanting to become a podcaster, don't do that. Another thing, then I kind of transitioned into coaching. I met a bunch of life coaches and things like that. So I would interview them. I didn't have the money to pay a life coach, but I knew that interviewing life coaches, I would basically get what I wanted from that life coach. So I started a podcast called Average to Awesome, where I interviewed these life coaches, and it went bad. It went horrible very fast because I made the mistake of trying to emulate a very popular podcast on fire, if you know which one I'm talking about. So I decided to kick that one off to the side, and I took a year off to learn everything I could about podcasting. I mean, I went back as far as even learning the history of radio and where radio transitioned into the new age and how their technology kept growing, and then moving into RTF, then switching over to RSS, and just took that whole podcast journey from beginning to where we're at now. Learned whatever I could about it, and then I implemented it in my new show, which is Raw and Real. And that it wasn't an immediate, rise to the top by any means. And I think my first month I might have had 158 downloads, but it was a start. It was actually a very positive sign, because at 158 downloads, it's like, okay, somebody's listening. And then we go up from there. We keep on going. Now my show has become a show where you can pretty much do anything on it. It's an edutainment. I call it an edutainment podcast. I interview some amazing people. Next week, in fact, I've got some big, huge guests coming on. Now, I'll say that about all my guests, because all my guests are huge in my mind. But the point I'm trying to make is, even starting small at 158 downloads, the people that are coming on the show now are people that typically won't go on a show unless you have 10,000 downloads in a month, which is it's a tough journey. It's a long journey. I mean, it's not something that happens overnight for most people.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, when you started this new podcast, Raw and Real, what did you start off as the purpose of it? Like, why did you create this one in the first place specifically?
Well, here's the thing. There's so many business podcasts out there. I mean, we're on one right now, and there's a lot of business podcasts out there, and we're all struggling to find our niche, find what separates us from the next guy. Well, my thing was, with Raw and Real, is I didn't care so much about what you had. It's about who you are. And I've heard all the gurus say, hey, you got to get people to know, like, and trust you before they'll buy anything from you. Well, Raw and Real was that platform to where we could tell the personal journey to get people to know, like, and trust and connect with that entrepreneur. And when I started there, it just kind of blew up. It really, the feedback that I was getting from it was great, but it was very raw. It was very unpolished. So I was getting some of these entrepreneurs on there that were like Gary Vaynerchuk. The way they talked, very they would drop an F-bomb at the drop of a hat and use it as an adjective, noun, or verb. It didn't matter. And I really wanted to get away from that. So I actually had to stop the show. Literally stop the show, change the format altogether, where I went with a co-host, and me and my co-host just kind of talked back and forth for a while. Then I started doing some solo shows. And now I'm back to doing interviews. But I had to stop and restart. So it gets to that failure thing that I was talking about earlier on. Just because you fail once doesn't mean that you failed and you got to quit. It means that you found a way that isn't working. Once I relaunched it with this new format, I literally went from getting 1,000 downloads a month to now I'm getting 4,000 downloads a day. So it's really, sometimes you just have to be able to sit back, even though you love something that you're doing. Sometimes you got to sit back and look at it and say, okay, this ain't quite right yet. Let's rethink this and reset. Kind of like an Etch-a-Sketch,
Absolutely. And that is incredible that you're getting 4,000 downloads a day. Congratulations on that, man. So, for those entrepreneurs who they might be interested in podcasting, or they might want to learn more about it and might even start their own, let's provide some value. What sort of advice would you give them to help them kind of launch their their show, their own podcast?
You know, I learned through a great program. It was called the Free Podcast Course on iTunes. You can look it up. John Lee Dumas shares this podcast, and it's 10 episodes, and it'll take you literally from start to finish. Now, just because one person tells you this is the way to do it, there's a lot of different ways to do it. All I'm saying is use this course as a base, and then start using the things that he talks about in the podcast course to look for different things that will work for you. Like for me, for example, when he started talking about microphones, of course, he starts talking about the Heil PR40 microphone, which is a $499 microphone. I could not afford that. That was not in my budget. So my very first microphone, which I have on my desk all the time, was the Blue Snowball microphone, which is a $49 microphone, USB microphone. That's what I used to start my podcast. It wasn't the greatest quality mic in the world because I really didn't know how to use it, but it worked. It got me started. And then I started looking around, and he talks about using Adobe Premiere Adobe Audition for his mixing software. I couldn't afford that either. So I went with Audacity. It's a free software. I didn't have a mixer at the time, so I went with VoiceMeter. VoiceMeter is a free virtual mixer. So there's a lot of things out there that don't cost you anything whatsoever. If you buy yourself a decent mic, and like I said, $49, you can even get some that are cheaper that are just as good. You can use a $20 headset from Walmart. That's better audio quality than nothing at all, pretty much. Then you can, so for $20, a person's got a microphone, they've got Voicemeter, they can bring in their audio, they can have a mix minus, they don't have to pay for a Pamela or all these other Skype recording device softwares. They can use Audacity to mix in. So really, you've only spent $20. Now everybody's like, well, who do I host through? Well, there's free versions of that. There's free places to go for that. TalkShoe, for example, absolutely free, unlimited. You can download as many podcasts as you want, upload them to iTunes and all over the place, and your full investment has only been $20. You can't beat that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, once they have all the equipment and these entrepreneurs are ready to go, what sort of advice would you give them as far as the content of their show? Because I do think that content is extremely important.
Content is important, and you just have to focus your message. What's your grand message? What is the one thing, or maybe a couple of things? Like for example, for me, my first tagline was, "Everyone has a story. I'm providing the stage for you to tell it." And really, that's really what it boils down to is I love having people come on and tell their story. And I've learned how to ask the questions to be able to deliver those stories. So have a clear focus on where you want to go with your message, and then start bringing the people in. If you're going to do an interview show, bring the people in who can help move that to the next, move that story closer to what your goal topic is, or what your goal is. If you're in business and say you're, let's use Ace Hardware, for example. Ace Hardware is a brick and mortar business, and people think, well, I don't need a podcast, but why not? Maybe you provide maybe you have a product in your store that you sell. Well, if that's the case, get that on your podcast. Talk about it. Talk about how to use that tool. What type of people can use that tool for what purpose? So there's always a reason for it. It's just you got to find what it is that you need to be talking about. If you're selling products, talk about your products. Talk about how people use them. Bring people on who have used your product. And the same goes for video. If a person gets on and does live streaming is just podcasting with the camera on, is all it is. So there's so many different things that people can do, and live streaming is absolutely free. So why not use it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, we have our equipment, we have our software and everything. We have our content. How do you really get it going and take the podcast from something that a few people listen to just a ridiculous, explosion of growth in the business?
When you figure that out, call me back and tell me. No, really, realistically, it's a game. It's something to play around with, really. I don't do podcasting because I thought I was going to make a lot of money doing it, because I don't make a lot of money doing it. I make enough to pay for itself. Let's just put it that way. But realistically, the podcast in itself is just something I enjoy doing. I have a passion for it. So with that passion, I'm going to do those things like share it on Twitter and share it on Facebook and Instagram. I'm going to strategically build an audience on those Facebook groups. And that's the key thing, right? One of the things that maybe a secret bonus: create your strategic audience. Start friend requesting a certain amount of people that are going to either be listeners of your podcast or be subscribers to something that you're doing, or maybe they're buying a certain product that you're giving. Just use the Facebook search and start searching for people that have those likes and needs, and then start building your group around those people. The next thing you'll know, once you have hit a certain amount of people, you don't have to ask anybody anymore to join. People will be referred to your group. So there's kind of a hack in Facebook. Same thing with your friends list. Now, I did things a little bit different than everybody else. My personal profile page is my brand page, because I branded myself rather than branding my show. And in doing so, I started that strategic list, and I haven't sent out a friends request, I don't think, in 9 months. But yet every day I have 30 to 40 new friends requests. Now, of course, you don't accept all of them, because there are some pretty weird ones out there. But you learn after the first month of clicking on the wrong ones, you learn after about the first month that, oops, maybe I should vet these a little bit closer.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, by the way, thank you so much for all the value that you're providing. I really do think it's great. But when you are getting people on your show, how do you go about, one, finding them, and two, approaching them to come onto the show?
I do it differently than a lot of people do it. Some people, they see them on Facebook and they just reach out and they want to create hey, would you like to be on my show? And there's enough of us out there that are just absolutely hungry for being on people's shows, and we'll say yes to anything. No, I'm just kidding. But really, no, what it is, it's creating relationships. So what I'll do is I'll find somebody that I want to have on my show, and I'll send them a message, and then we'll just kind of have a conversation back and forth, kind of like what you and I did. We kind of had that initial conversation back and forth, and then I'll go learn more about them, do some research, and then when it's all said and done, then I'll ask them. It always helps to know who you're talking to before you just jump in. So after I've done my research, they'll go back at the very end and say, hey, I really like, for example, let's use Kobe K, for example. He's the CEO of Healthy Primate, which is an amazing supplement. So when I started learning about him, I figured out who he was. And then I went out and I actually did a promo in one of my shows. So I did my entire show and I said, hey, by the way, I want to introduce everybody to this new company called Healthy Primate. And I did a little short promo. It was about 2 to 5 minutes long. And then I tagged him in it. So now that put me onto his radar, not just as somebody who likes his stuff, but who's someone who's talking about, who's someone who's become a raving fan of his. So then that puts me on his radar. And then I started, the conversation again. And then just last a couple days ago, I said, hey, would you like to come on the show and talk about Healthy Primate? Maybe follow up on what it was that promo. And he was right away. He's absolutely, of course. Tell me when I can sign up or where I sign up. So my strategy is create that communication, create that relationship first, And then when they come on your show, by the time they come on your show, they're just an old friend.
That's cool. That's a really cool way to do it. Um, so, uh, in doing all these different podcasts and shows, I'm sure you have tons of great stories and interesting experiences. But maybe you could just share a few of them with us of I guess the most interesting or the best shows that you've done so far.
Okay. Well, actually, I'm going to tell you about a failure. How about that?
Great, great.
So I had a group of people, Ramona Rice, Eddie Lazzari, Ray Rideout. All of them have amazing shows of their own. And we got together to do this project. It was a complete comedy show. And we actually tested it on a test audience. And they were laughing so hard. They had fallen out of their seats. They were snorting. It was great. They loved the show. Ramona Rice is one of the funniest women you'll ever meet in podcasting. Ray Rideout, same type of deal. Extremely funny. Eddie Lazzari, very dry. He actually was, I think he was what brought the comedy because he was so dry. It was like, so we'd pick on him a little bit, and stuff like, but anyways, it was a great show idea. So the day we end up launching, we're recording for the launch, and we had this other show. It was a radio show, who was going to come in and be part of the show at the end of the show. And we were very non-political, very, very straight. Just it's all comedy. We're just going to have fun with this. So we bring them in. We have a great show for the first 30 minutes of the show. We bring in this radio show. And right away, they start talking about some of the most extremist crap you can imagine, even though we had already set the boundaries of what we were going to do. They just went off on about, well, you got to be a second amender. If you're not a second amender, you're wrong. And you got to protect your rights and blah, blah, blah. You know what? Here's the thing. We didn't care. And none of us had anything close to the same views as these people. None of us do. So they come on the show. They totally derail the show. We, all four of us, struggle to try to pull back the reins a little bit and control the show. Finally, I just killed the feed and I was like, enough's enough. I can't do this. And then tragedy struck the next week, right before we were getting ready to do the second show. Ramona's husband passed away. And when Ramona's husband passed away, we decided, you know what, we're just going to kill the show out of respect for Ramona, because she was going to have to leave. Eddie was going to be moving on and leaving because he took a position in a college, and it was just me and Ray. And well, to be honest with you, when I talk to Ray and Ray talks to me, we just kind of look at each other with blank stares on our faces, not knowing what to say next. So Ray and Ramona and Eddie really were the heart and soul of the show. So once they left, we had to kill it.
Wow, that's an incredible story. But yeah, man, that's awesome. So that's one of like you said, one of the failures. But maybe you could share one or two more stories of either something really interesting or funny or just cool that happened on your show before.
Sure. I got a really interesting story. Okay, so this last year, I'm a motorcycle enthusiast. I belong to the Combat Veterans Motorcycle Association, and we all have our vests with our patches on, so everybody knows who we are and what we do. Well, we're at a bar during the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally last year, and it's the largest motorcycle rally in the country. At least that's what we say, because Daytona's too far away for us to go to. So we're sitting in this bar, and these two guys from Canada start talking to us, and then they start buying us drinks. And the more drinks they buy, the more open and conversational people become. It's just the way liquor is. So as we're sitting there talking to him, the one guy tells me that he's the goalie for the Rapid City Rush hockey team, professional hockey team we have. I'm like, oh, hey, Bataccio. Yeah, I thought I recognized your name. And then the other guy sitting right to the right, his name, Daniel Tatro. Daniel Tatro was like the god of Rapid City Rush hockey. He was the guy, the number one defenseman, all that kind of stuff. Everybody in the community loves him. and now he's the assistant coach for the team. So I asked him, just out of whim. I was just sitting there, we're drunk talking and all this. Hey, you think I could get you on my show? I have a podcast. And his first thing is, well, that's a podcast. So I tell him what a podcast is, and he's like, yeah, that sounds cool. Well, we set that up. Well, 4 months goes by. Haven't talked to each other in 4 months. All of a sudden, out of the blue, I get a message on Facebook. Hey, CJ, would you like to do that interview? I'm like, sure. I thought you forgot about me, So I show up at the ice arena, and the video is actually up on the Raw and Real page. But we show up at the ice arena, and in the back, we go up into the executive lounge, where all the hot shots get to go and do their, watch their games. I've never been in that, that upper level where all the big money plays.
Yeah, like the executive suites and stuff.
Yeah. Their bar looks a whole lot nicer than that little cart that they have down in the common area. But anyways, so we're sitting up there, and we got the ice rink down below us in the background. The scene looks awesome, and we sit down, we have a great conversation. Now, I'm a hockey guy. I know hockey, and between the two of us, we had such a great conversation about hockey, his career and just hockey in general. And we got all the way to the part where we we're getting ready to transition over to talking about his change from being a player to a coach, and the video goes dead.
Oh.
The feed cuts out on us, which actually was great. I'm glad it did that, because that first segment turned out to be an entire hour by itself.
Wow.
So it gave me an excuse to contact him again, say, hey, when can we do a part 2? Because he absolutely loved being part of that first one. So he's like, yeah, sure, let's do a part 2. Hey, and if you ever want to interview any of the players or the other coaches, just let me know and I'll set you up. Oh, by the way, did you want to come to the game tomorrow night? Here's some free tickets. So now I'm getting free tickets from the guy. I get access to all the pro players that come into the organization. And these are guys that are playing at the NHL level who come down, they bounce back and forth, kind of like the minor leagues in baseball, They bounce up and down. So these are guys that are coming out of the NHL to play and recover from injury or whatever. And I've got full access to all these people. And it was such a door opener for me to be able to kind of jump into a whole new avenue of my podcast. Because that episode was the first episode that hit 2,200 views like instantly. Wow. Within hours, it was over 2,200. So that was that one. And it wasn't. If I ask you, do you know who Daniel Tatro is? You probably tell me, I've never heard of the guy. But the ability to be able to connect with a guest, that's where the value was. It wasn't so much who the guest was. It was the connection that me and the guest had while we were doing the interview. The ability to connect with your guest, that is the key, one of the most important things that any podcaster can develop when they're doing a show.
Absolutely, and I think that's a golden nugget of information that you just dropped. But maybe you could expand on that a little bit. How do you find the best way to connect with your guests is?
I just ignore them. No, really. I love people. I mean, it's that natural. I don't know the word for it. That the need to know what's behind the closed curtains. You know what I mean? So meeting you, I really want to know what's going on behind you, because right now all I know is you're a podcast host. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, who is this guy? What's he do? What's his story? I want to know, why are we interviewing me? Why am I not interviewing him? Those are the things that are going through my mind. So that natural need to know what people are about and really care what people are doing. I truly, sincerely care what other people are doing in their lives. So that having that ability is so key for me and my success, because everybody is fascinating to me. And the more fascinating those people are to me, and the ability to translate that across to the audience, that's what makes them fascinating to them now. And my audience, I call them the best audience in the world because they have the best BS meters. So if someone comes on the show and they're not being real, they'll call them out. They've done it.
Okay, I gotta hear that story. What happened? What happened?
Uh, okay, so I'm not going to use his name because I really do like the kid. But so he comes on the show. The first time he come on the show, it was like episode 2 or 3 or 4. It was early on, and he came on the show, and it was the first time he'd ever been on a podcast, and he was just all over the board. He had no concept of what he really wanted to talk about, even though I'm trying to lead him with the question to the point where at the very end, I am literally leading his answer, question with his answer that he should be giving because I know him well enough to do that. Well, then the second time he come on, he had a full agenda. He was going to just steamroll this show, and it didn't matter who, what questions I asked. He knew exactly where he wanted to go with the show. So the third time I had him on the show, and this is where the story actually breaks in. The third time I had him on the show, he starts coming on, and we're going through the story, his history and stuff like that. And we get to this one point, and I do my show live. So there's comments down, we can read the comments. Well, one of the people that was watching had seen the other 2 episodes, and he called him out. Wait a minute. What about, because he was coming on saying he was an expert on how to get people onto media. Wait a minute. What about that time you said that if it wasn't for CJ helping you out, you never would have known how to get on media? But yet now you're all of a sudden an expert. And so the guy is literally calling him out on all this stuff. And then he mentions this other thing. He's like, wait. No, you didn't come up with that. That's something that Bob Proctor's been talking about since 1979. So he's literally getting heckled by my audience. But this show is raw and real. I'm not going to stop somebody from calling somebody or keeping somebody real. If my audience knows something about something and they're going to keep them real, that's okay on my show. But they do it to me also. If I say something that they think is a little bit, maybe I don't have all my facts straight, they will call me out. Barb Tomlin does this really well when we start talking about YouTube. I was given a course on YouTube, and I was talking about that course on my show, and she called me out. And even though Barb is such a wonderful woman, and I've known her for a year now, and her and I have never agreed on everything. And I finally just had to tell her, I say, hey, look, YouTube is very subjective. Things work for me that may not work for you, just like things work for you that may not work for me. Doesn't matter. All I'm trying to do is give a person a foundation, somewhere to start, and then start learning at what works for them. She goes, oh, well, now that you put it that way, I guess that makes sense. I'm sorry for being so hard on you. Like, so I'm not immune to it either. If I say something that somebody says, I don't know if I agree with all of that, they'll call me out, and it's fun. It really, that interaction with the audience is what it's all about.
I mean, that's phenomenal because, I mean, it keeps your show raw and real. Like it really does. That's a really cool.
Yeah,
facet.
they're my watch guards.
Absolutely. So, you said something earlier about how, you were doing, you had your show and you kind of started and stopped and you're going through a few different things. How did that affect your momentum? Like when you started back with Raw and Real, did it mess you up or how did that dynamic go?
I'll show you my numbers. I can show you how that affected me. If you can imagine this, picture this. In February, I'm at 158. Then in like March, I'm at 1,200 or something like that. Then April, I was at just about 2,000 or 3,000 total for monthly downloads. And then May, I was down to like 42. So I had to start all over. And then June was like 160. And then since then, it's just been a constant rise. But yeah, it really did affect me. But even though that that hit me so hard, I mean, going from a couple thousand down to 42, it was the right thing to do. Because it it was that etch a sketch effect. It was me saying, okay, this is what I tried to do, didn't work, turn it over, shake it up, start again. Let's try it again. That area where I was trying it again and I lost all those people, it wasn't because the message wasn't right or whatever. It really was the fact that I didn't like some of the feedback I was getting. People that I highly respect were contacting me and say, hey, that the content was good. What you were trying to do is great, but that kind of language, even though it's a podcast and you can do whatever you want, that kind of language isn't going to resonate with the majority of the audience. You might get a small percentage of people that don't care about what kind of words come out of somebody's mouth. But at the end of the day, we want to hear someone who sounds professional, who is delivering in a way that anybody can receive, who's non-offensive, who's pleasant. You want to hear that message. You want to accept that message. But hearing the message and accepting a message where where F-bomb is the common noun, that's not something that everybody is going to resonate with. So by turning off the switch, losing that part of the audience who that's what they're looking for, I was able to regain 3 times the audience because now it was a little bit easier to accept.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it kind of seems like it's putting this analogy in my head of having to trim a bush or something that's like a plant. You gotta trim away the parts that are maybe a little bit overgrown or old and let the new come out and become even better than it was before.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I'm glad you said that. So we've been talking about podcasting for a while. I wanna switch a little bit more towards entrepreneurship, and specifically towards educating yourself, because I think one very big piece of the entrepreneurship puzzle is learning and growing and developing yourself. So if you could point to maybe give 3 or whatever number you want, books that have been very influential and impactful to you.
Oh, wow. You mean I had to read before I got on this show? No, actually, I read some great books. The first book that I read was Money, a book called Money by Tony Robbins. That is, well, it's not the first book I read, but that's a book I read. That was absolutely phenomenal. I mean, everybody thinks Tony Robbins is going to come out with some kind of mindset or walk on fire type of thing, but this was all about investments. And it was huge. I mean, absolutely, completely 180 degrees what you'd think Tony Robbins would do, but it was absolutely huge. He interviewed 4 of the most successful people, Warren Buffett, for example, and he talked, how did you make your money? Through investments. And it was all about investments. And that's, as an entrepreneur, we don't have a 401k. We don't have a retirement plan. So investments is an extremely important area to start learning about, so you can set yourself up. Because for most entrepreneurs, you start your business, and if it's a business that's going to sustain any kind of growth, the day you stop your business is the day you stop earning. So I took it upon myself to start learning about investments. How am I going to set myself up for a life after I decide that I want to retire? And that Money by Tony Robbins was how I did that. The other one that I highly, highly suggest, if people don't read it, that's fine. But it's called The Art of War by Sun Tzu. There are so many lessons that you can learn in that book. Yeah, and I understand it's a military journal, but there are so many things that you can take from that book that will lead over into entrepreneurship. And I think they even wrote a book called The Art of War of Business, or The Art of Business, or something to that effect, that kind of helps people make that transition a little bit. But just taking those core principles out of The Art of War, it's being able to know my competition as I know myself. I need not fear a 1,000 boardrooms type of thing. Those types of analogies, I was able to make them real easily. Um, the part in the book about spying on your enemy. Well, everybody spies on their competition. Everybody wants to know what their competition is doing so they can set themselves aside and set themselves apart from what their competition is doing so they can stand out. There's so many things. It talks about leadership. Now, not all of us are building a business where we need a lot of employees. However, when we do get to that point, it's important to understand that being able to lead your employees and being able to trust your employees to do what needs to be done to grow your business is extremely important. And that's another thing that you can learn out of this book. And then the third book that I would highly suggest, highly suggest, and I'm going to take a lot of garbage for this, I guarantee it. And it's called The Art of the Deal with Donald Trump. Bear with me here. I'm not saying that because I'm not going political here. I'm not. But the stuff that he talks about in the book, just the business aspect of the book, it makes sense. One of the key things that I took away from it was the fact that he's always reading. He's always looking. He's got piles upon piles of periodicals that he goes through. He's always keeping an eye on what the market's doing, what the trends are, what trends are coming. Those are the kind of lessons that I was able to learn from reading this book. I know he's not the most popular guy in the world. Sometimes, some people, I guess he's the most popular guy in the world, but for not everybody. But that book is absolutely genius when it talks about how a person goes from, this beginning and takes them to this this position. So absolutely. Those are the three books I would recommend.
Absolutely, and I appreciate you keeping it non-political. I don't want to start any fires here, but I do think that there is something to be said about learning from smart people and reading their books and learning about their lives and just kind of getting in their head a little bit is one of my favorite ways to do it. So I'm glad you shared that. We talked a little bit about your past. We talked a little bit about your present, what you're doing now. I want to talk a little bit about the future, and then wrap up pretty soon here. I do appreciate your time. What do you, CJ, want to leave behind as your legacy?
Oh, as a legacy, everything that we do right now, with the live stream, with the podcasting, everything that we bring to the masses is part of that legacy. And I guess the thing that means the most to me is being able to leave a trail of breadcrumbs, if you will. And at the end of that trail of breadcrumbs, it's that message of, hey, follow your passion, live the life that you want to live. Don't settle for average. Just go ahead and decide to be awesome. That's really the message that I want to be able to leave behind.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. So just have one more question for you. Is there anything about yourself that you think is an important part of who you are that I did not ask you about today? In other words, what did I miss?
The thing about people is you never know what you're going to get, period. Looking at me, if you were to meet me, you would never know that I was a 2-time gold medal figure skater in Paris figure skating. But it's true. I was able to get out there and do something with my daughter. It was a father-daughter skating event, and we won the gold medal twice. So that's something that people don't understand. If you want to just have a happy life, don't stress on the little things. Don't stress about, if I don't do this, I'm not going to be successful. If I don't do this, I'm not going to be able to go to this event, or I'm not going to be able to push the envelope, or I'm not going to be a millionaire by I'm 30. Stress on the big things in your life. Stress on the family members in your life who are going to be there to support you, to hold you up, to catch you when you fall. Stress on those things. My kids and my wife are the most important people in my life. I love people, all people. I have nothing but respect for everybody who has a story. But my family are the three people, those three women have been there behind me every step of the way. They've pushed me when I needed pushing. They've held me back when I was going to do something extremely stupid. So, and they allow me to still be a child. I go out in public with my children and we just goof around. My daughter will say Marco and I'll say pizza. I mean, those types of things in the middle of a store, and people are looking at us like, oh, I would never do that. But we do. We have such fun. We don't take ourselves serious, and we have a happy family. And when you have a happy family, your business can't do nothing but else but succeed because all the stress is gone.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I want to thank you very much for your time today. I know you're a busy man, and I really do appreciate you coming on the show and giving us so much knowledge and sharing your story with myself and the audience. I really do appreciate that, man. So
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
absolutely, and for everybody listening, I highly encourage you to check out his podcast. That's Raw and Real. Again, thank you very much. And to everybody who is listening, I want to thank you wholeheartedly for everything that you do and for supporting the show and doing everything that you guys do and girls do to make this a success. So I want to thank you very much. But this has been another Project Egg interview, and today we've been talking to CJ Ripka from South Dakota. Thank you so much.